The message arrived on a cold morning in December when snow was falling over Geneva. Ambassador Lena Cole stood in the Great Hall of the United Earth Council, her hands shaking as she held the translated document. Around her sat the leaders of every nation on Earth, all of them silent, all of them waiting. She cleared her throat and began to read. The Galactic Concord, a governing body of 12 alien species that had ruled the known galaxy for 50,000 years, had been watching humanity. They had observed humans since the first fires were lit in caves. They had watched as cities rose and empires fell. They had taken notes when humans split the atom and cheered when the first rockets reached space. And now, after centuries of observation, they had reached a decision. Earth was to become a labor world. Humans were to become slaves. The document used polite words. It spoke of integration and practical service. It mentioned the strong bodies of humans, their clever hands, their ability to survive in harsh conditions. The aliens had decided that humans were perfectly suited for mining, construction, and service work across their vast territories. The vote had been unanimous. All 12 species, from the to the crystalline, had agreed without a single objection. Lena finished reading and the hall remained silent. Then someone laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. Admiral Lane, commander of Earth's small defensive fleet, rose from his chair. He was 62 years old with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. He walked to the center of the hall and looked around at the gathered leaders. "They want our answer in 30 days, he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "They expect us to surrender. They expect us to accept chains around our necks and thank them for the privilege." The President of the United States, a woman named, leaned forward. "What choice do we have? Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Our entire fleet could not scratch the paint on one of their battleships." Nodded slowly. "That is true today, but 30 days is a long time, and they have made a mistake that will cost them everything." "What mistake?" asked the Prime Minister of India. Mild, but there was no warmth in it. "They have united us. For the first time in human history, every nation, every person, every resource on this planet has a single purpose. They have given us an enemy that everyone can hate. They have given us a reason to fight that no one can argue against." He paused and looked at the document in Lena's hands. "They voted to enslave us, all of them, without exception, without mercy. Now they will learn what humans do when we have nothing left to lose." The debates lasted for hours. Some leaders wanted to negotiate, to find some compromise that would spare humanity the worst. Others demanded immediate surrender to avoid the destruction of their cities. But slowly, one by one, they began to see what saw. There would be no mercy from the conquered. The aliens did not see humans as people. They saw tools, resources, things to be used and discarded. By midnight, the decision was made. Earth would fight. The news spread across the planet within hours. People gathered in streets, in homes, in places of worship. Some wept, some raged. But a strange thing happened in the days that followed. The old divisions that had separated humanity for centuries began to fade. Countries that had been enemies for generations found themselves working together. Resources flowed freely across borders. Scientists shared secrets that governments had guarded for decades. In a small apartment in Chicago, a young engineer named Moore watched the chaos on his screen. He was 34 years old with messy brown hair and tired eyes. For 3 years, he had worked on experimental propulsion systems, technologies that his superiors had deemed too dangerous for practical use. The energy requirements were too high. The risk of catastrophic failure was too great. But now, as he watched the world prepare for war, he began to think differently. He called his former professor, Dr. Sandra, a physicist who had spent her career being laughed at by the academic community. Her theories about folding space, about creating shortcuts through dimensions, had been dismissed as fantasy. She answered on the second ring. "You've seen the news," said. "I've seen it," Sandra replied. Her voice was steady, almost eager. "I've been waiting for your call. They said your theories were impossible." They said a lot of things, but impossible is just a word people use when they lack imagination. She paused. I have the equations. I've had them for years. What I never had was the funding, the resources, the will to test them. Looked out his window at the city below. People were moving with purpose, carrying supplies, helping neighbors, preparing for a fight that seemed hopeless. I think you'll find that will is no longer a problem. Within a week, and Sandra were brought to a facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. It was a place that officially did not exist, funded by every nation on Earth, staffed by the minds humanity had to offer. They worked around the clock, sleeping in shifts, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Meanwhile, Admiral Lane reorganized Earth's military. The old structures, designed for wars between nations, were torn apart and rebuilt. Every factory that could make weapons was converted to military production. Every shipyard began constructing vessels of war. Training camps opened across the globe, filled with volunteers who knew they might never see their families again. Colonel Price, a veteran of 3 conflicts, led the training programs. He pushed his recruits to their limits and beyond. Among them was a young pilot named Grace Harper, a woman whose reflexes had broken every simulator record. She flew with a recklessness that terrified her instructors and a precision that amazed them. "You fly like you have nothing to lose," told her one evening. Grace looked at him with cold eyes. None of us do, they made sure of that. The Concord sent observation drones to Earth during those 30 days. They expected to see panic, chaos, and collapse. Instead, they saw factories running day and night. They saw millions of people moving with unified purpose. They saw a species preparing for war with a determination that the aliens could not understand. High Commander of the reviewed the reports and dismissed them. Humans were primitives. Their technology was laughable. Their defiance was merely the last gasp of a doomed species. He ordered his enforcement fleet to prepare for departure, confident that Earth would fall within hours of their arrival. He could not have been more wrong. As the 30th day approached, Lena Cole sent a final message to the Concord. Her words were carefully chosen, designed to sound defeated and desperate. She begged for more time, claimed that Earth's governments were fighting among themselves, suggested that surrender was inevitable but needed to be managed carefully. The aliens believed every word. They had seen this pattern before in dozens of other species: denial, anger, bargaining, and finally acceptance. Humanity was following the script perfectly. They never suspected that behind the pleading words, a species was sharpening its claws. They never imagined that the primitives they had condemned to slavery were building weapons that would shake the foundations of the galaxy. They never dreamed that their unanimous vote would be their death sentence. The 30th day arrived. The conquered fleet launched, and humanity waited in the darkness, ready to show the galaxy what rage truly meant. 6 months had passed since the Concord delivered its sentence. The alien enforcement fleet had taken its time, moving through the galaxy at a pace that spoke of absolute confidence. They stopped at supply stations, conducted training exercises, and sent regular reports to there. The enslavement of Earth was treated as a routine operation, a simple task that required no urgency. When they finally reached the edge of the Sol system, they found something unexpected: silence. Earth's communication networks, which had buzzed with desperate pleas and political chaos for weeks, had gone completely dark. No signals escaped the planet. No ships moved in the void. Even the observation drones that the Concord had left behind had stopped transmitting. High Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Dominion. His body was covered in hard black plates, and his 4 arms folded across his chest as he studied the empty screens. They were an ancient species, proud and certain of their superiority. They had crushed hundreds of civilizations during their long history. This silence from Earth was unusual, but felt no concern. "Send scout ships," he ordered. "Find out why they have gone quiet." The scouts departed and never returned. Their signals simply stopped, cut off in the middle of routine transmissions. Sent more scouts, armed this time with instructions to engage any hostile forces. They too vanished without a trace. The other species in the fleet began to worry. Ambassador of an aquatic being who spoke through a translation device, approached with concerns. They were cautious by nature, their civilization built on careful planning and risk assessment. "Something is wrong," said. "We should request reinforcements before proceeding." Made a sound of contempt. "You fear primitives who cannot even build proper starships. The humans are hiding, trembling in their caves like the animals they are. We will find them and drag them out." He ordered the fleet forward. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that had been carved from solid rock, Moore stood before a device that all known physics. It was a cylinder of dark metal, humming with energy that seemed to bend the light around it. Beside him, Dr. Sandra ran calculations on a tablet, her face lit by the glow of the screen. "The dimensional fold is stable," she said. "We can move objects through compressed space without destroying them. The test objects arrived intact at every target location." Nodded, but his eyes remained on the device. "Test objects are one thing, ships are another, people are something else entirely." "I know." Sandra set down her tablet and looked at him directly. "But we do not have more time. The conquered fleet will arrive within days. Either this works or nothing works." They had spent 6 months pushing the limits of human science. The theories that Sandra had developed over decades were transformed into functioning technology. Unstable propulsion systems were refined and integrated into ship designs that looked nothing like anything humanity had built before. Engineers and scientists from every nation contributed their knowledge, their skills, their lives. Admiral Lane visited the facility regularly. He watched the progress with the careful eye of a military commander, asking questions, demanding updates, pushing for faster results. But he also understood the weight that rested on these scientists. They were being asked to create miracles, and somehow they were delivering. "How many ships can we equip with this technology?" asked during one visit. 47, replied. "Maybe 50 if we push the production lines harder, but the crews will need training. The dimensional fold is not like normal travel. It requires perfect timing, perfect coordination. One mistake in a ship could end up inside a star." Absorb this information without expression. Train them. Use simulations, use whatever you need. I want those ships ready when the conquered arrives. On the dark side of Luna, hidden from Earth observation and alien sensors alike, the shipyards worked without pause. Massive structures of metal and energy took shape in the vacuum of space. These were not the clumsy vessels that humanity had used for exploration and commerce. These were weapons, pure and simple. Their hulls were made of materials that had been invented months ago. Their weapons systems operated on principles that the conquered had never encountered. Colonel Price trained the crews that would operate these ships. He pushed them beyond exhaustion, beyond fear, beyond everything they thought they knew about themselves. The men and women who emerged from his training were not the same people who had entered. They were soldiers in a way that humanity had never produced before. Grace Harper became one of his best. She flew the prototype fighters with a skill that amazed everyone who watched. Her movements were precise, her decisions instant, her instincts deadly. In simulations, she destroyed enemy ships with an efficiency that bordered on artistic. But noticed something in her eyes that worried him. There was anger there, deep and cold. It was useful in combat but dangerous in peacetime. He made a note to watch her carefully. Above the training grounds, beyond the hidden shipyards, Ambassador Lena Cole continued her performance. She sent messages to the conquered filled with excuses and delays. She described political crises, internal rebellions, resource shortages. She painted a picture of a planet tearing itself apart, a species too divided to resist its fate. The conquered believed her. They had seen this pattern countless times. Primitive species always fell into chaos when faced with superior power. The humans were simply taking longer than most, but the outcome was never in doubt. Lena played her role perfectly. She was a diplomat, trained in the art of saying nothing while appearing to say everything. But inside, she burned with the same rage that drove the soldiers and scientists. Her people had been condemned to slavery without a trial, without a hearing, without even the pretense of fairness. Every smile she sent to the aliens, every word of false surrender, was a lie that brought humanity closer to revenge. The conquered fleet entered the inner solar system on a bright Tuesday morning. 300 warships, each one the size of a city, arranged in perfect formation. They broadcast their arrival on all frequencies, demanding immediate surrender and the presentation of human leaders for processing. No response came. Ordered his fleet to advance toward Earth. His sensors showed nothing unusual, just a blue planet orbiting a yellow star, primitive satellites drifting in low orbit, a handful of space stations that posed no threat. He prepared the standard subjugation protocols, the same ones that had been used on dozens of worlds before. In the facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Lane received the final reports from his commanders. The ships were ready. The crews were trained. The weapons were armed. 6 months of impossible work had produced a fleet that existed outside the understanding of galactic science. General, his second-in-command, stood beside him as the countdown began. She was a tall woman with silver hair and a face that revealed nothing. She had commanded ground forces for 30 years, and now she was watching humanity take its first steps toward the stars as a military power. "They have no idea what is coming," she said quietly. Nodded, "That is the point. They looked at us and saw slaves. They looked at our technology and saw toys. They looked at our anger and saw fear." He paused and watched the screens as the conquered fleet moved into position. They made every mistake that arrogance allows, and now they will pay for each one. He reached for the console that would signal the attack. His hand was steady. His heart was calm. Behind him, thousands of crew members waited at their stations, ready to execute the plan that would either save humanity or destroy it. "All stations confirm ready," announced. Activated the signal. Across the solar system, hidden ships powered up their dimensional fold drives. Weapons systems came online. Targeting computers locked onto enemy vessels. And in the darkness of space, 47 ships that should not exist prepared to change the course of galactic history. The conquered had come to collect their slaves. They would find something very different waiting for them. The conquered fleet hung in space like a wall of metal and fire. 300 warships arranged in perfect formation, their weapons powered down because they expected no resistance. High Commander stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching the blue planet on his screens. Earth looked peaceful, innocent, helpless. In a few hours, it would belong to the conquered. He never saw the attack coming. Space itself seemed to tear open. 47 human ships appeared from nowhere, materializing in the spaces between conquered vessels without warning, without any sensor indication, without anything that the alien computers could understand. One moment the humans were not there. The next moment they were everywhere. Captain Daniel Grant commanded the Earth vessel Retribution. He was 40 years old with a calm voice and steady hands. His ship emerged less than a kilometer from the Eternal Dominion, so close that he could see the individual lights on the alien hull. He gave his orders without hesitation. "All weapons fire." The first volley struck before the conquered could react. Human weapons operated on principles that the aliens had never seen. Kinetic rounds accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible. Energy beams cut through alien armor like it was paper. And something worse, something the scientists had called spatial compression charges, created tiny tears in space that swallowed sections of ships whole. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as its engines were surgically removed from its hull, stumbled and fell, his four arms scrambling for support as his flagship died around him. Warning lights filled the bridge. Damage reports flooded the communication systems. His officers screamed in languages he could not understand. "Return fire," he roared. "Destroy them." But his weapons could not lock onto the human ships. They moved in patterns that the conquered targeting systems could not predict. They appeared in one location, fired, and vanished before counterattacks could reach them. The dimensional fold technology allowed them to fight a battle that the aliens could not comprehend. Grace Harper flew her fighter through the chaos like a dancer through flames. Her small craft wove between the massive conquered vessels, striking at weak points that the targeting computers identified. She destroyed a destroyer with a single well-placed shot to its power core. She crippled a cruiser by severing its command module from its body. She moved faster than thought, faster than fear, faster than anything the aliens had ever encountered. 12 confirmed kills, her targeting computer announced in a flat voice. Grace did not respond. She was already hunting her next target. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, 283 conquered vessels had been destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships drifted without power, their crews dead or dying, their commanders captured or killed. Human losses totaled 9 ships, mostly from accidents during dimensional fold operations rather than enemy fire. Admiral Lane watched the final moments from his command center beneath Geneva. The screens showed the wreckage of what had been the mightiest fleet in the galaxy. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers. Escape pods launched from dying ships, their occupants desperate to survive long enough to tell their people what had happened. Let them go. He wanted survivors. He wanted the story to spread. General stood beside him, her face expressionless but her eyes bright. "We have captured High Commander," she reported. "His ship is disabled but intact. He is demanding to speak with our leadership." Considered this for a moment. "Let him wait. There is something I need to do first." He walked to a communication console and began recording a message. His face was tired from old battles, but his voice was strong. The message would be broadcast on all conquered frequencies, sent to every world in the galaxy that could receive it. To the galactic conquered and all species who endorsed the enslavement of humanity, you offered us chains. We decline. You voted for our fate without opposition. Every species agreed. Every species participated. Every species bears responsibility. He paused and looked directly at the camera. This is not war. This is consequence. You will answer for what you have done, and you will learn that humanity does not forget. The message ended. Within hours, it reached the 12 conquered species. The reactions varied from panic to rage, but one emotion was universal: fear. Emergency sessions convened across the galaxy. The beings of crystal and light analyzed the battle data with growing horror. Human weapons operated on principles that their scientists could not explain. Human ships moved through dimensions that the conquered had not even known existed. In 47 minutes, the humans had destroyed a fleet that should have been invincible. They demanded immediate negotiations. Their leaders, floating in vast chambers of water, argued that humanity had proven itself worthy of respect. The conquered should offer peace, offer alliance, offer anything to stop the violence. They refused. Their pride would not allow them to accept defeat at the hands of primitives. They called for total war, for the complete destruction of Earth and everyone on it. Better to burn the human to ash than to admit that the conquered had made a mistake. Other species fell somewhere in between. The warriors who valued strength above all else found themselves strangely impressed by human tactics. The merchants who cared only for profit calculated the cost of continued conflict and found it unacceptable. The ancient beings who remembered the founding of the conquered watched in silence and wondered if they were witnessing the end of an era. On Earth, the victory was celebrated with tears and fire. People danced in streets, embraced strangers, wept for loved ones who had died in the battle. For 6 months they had worked in fear, uncertain if their efforts would make any difference. Now they knew. Humanity could fight. Humanity could win. But Admiral Lane did not celebrate. He sat alone in his office, staring at reports that listed the dead. 9 ships, nearly 2,000 crew members. They had won a miracle, but miracles had costs. Moore visited him that evening. The young engineer looked exhausted, his eyes red, his clothes wrinkled from days without proper rest. He sat across from and said nothing for a long moment. "The technology worked," finally said. "Better than we hoped. The dimensional fold is stable. The weapons are effective. We can build more ships, train more crews, expand our capabilities." Nodded slowly. "And then what?" "Then we defend ourselves. We make sure no one ever tries to enslave us again." "That is not enough." Looked at the young man with eyes that had seen too much. "They voted unanimously. Every species. Every world. They looked at us and saw things to be used. If we only defend ourselves, they will wait, rebuild, and try again. We must make them understand that the cost of attacking humanity is extinction." Absorbed this in silence. He was a scientist, not a soldier. The idea of extinction, of destroying entire civilizations, felt alien to him. But he remembered the document that Lena Cole had read in Geneva. He remembered the cold words that had condemned his species to slavery, and he understood that mercy in this case might be the choice of all. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Handed him a tablet. "Build me a fleet. Build me weapons that will make them afraid to speak our name. Build me the power to end this, one way or another." Took the tablet and left without another word. He returned to his facility beneath the Rocky Mountains and began the work that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. The war had just begun. 2 years had passed since the first battle, and the galaxy was burning. Human fleets struck without warning across conquered space. They appeared from dimensional folds, destroyed their targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Supply lines were cut. Military bases were reduced to rubble. Colonies that had prospered for thousands of years found themselves isolated, helpless, waiting for the human ships to arrive. The conquered's unity, built over 50,000 years, began to crack. They were the first to break. They were a logical species, beings of crystal and light who valued reason above emotion. Their calculations were simple. The war could not be won. Human technology was advancing faster than the conquered could adapt. Human rage showed no signs of fatting. Every month brought new defeats, new losses, new proof that the old order was ending. Ambassador, a shifting lattice of blue light, traveled to Earth to seek peace. The journey was dangerous. Human forces controlled most of the routes, and ships had been destroyed without warning in dozens of encounters. But came alone, unarmed, broadcasting messages of peaceful intent. Lena Cole received the ambassador in Geneva. She was no longer the frightened diplomat who had read the slavery decree. 2 years of war had hardened her. She sat across from the being and listened to its proposal without expression. "We offer complete withdrawal from the conflict," said. "We will publicly condemn the resolution of practical integration. We will provide reparations in technology, resources, and knowledge. We ask only for peace." Lena was silent for a long moment. Through the window behind her, she could see the city of Geneva, rebuilt after conquered bombing raids had destroyed much of it in the early months of the war. People walked the streets below, going about their lives, trying to remember what normal felt like. "You voted for our enslavement," she said finally, "unanimously, without debate." "We calculated that resistance was impossible," replied. "We were incorrect." "Yes, you were." Lena leaned forward. "Do you understand what you did? You looked at 7 billion human beings and saw tools. You decided that our lives, our dreams, our families meant nothing, and you expected us to accept this." Light flickered, a sign of distress among them. We have made an error, we acknowledge this, we seek to correct it. The negotiations lasted for months. Lena extracted concessions that would have been unthinkable before the war. They would recognize human sovereignty, pay substantial reparations, share their most advanced technologies, and accept human observers in their government. They would become the first species to formally acknowledge the crime of the resolution. Other species watched carefully. The whose breeding grounds had been devastated by precision strikes soon followed the example. Their surrender was unconditional. They offered everything and asked only to be spared. But not everyone was ready for peace. There were warriors. Their entire civilization was built around combat, around the glory of battle, around the belief that strength was the only virtue that mattered. They had enthusiastically supported the enslavement of humanity, eager to test themselves against a new species. Now they refused to surrender, even as their fleets burned and their colonies fell. Admiral Lane gave them one chance. He sent a message to their offering peace in exchange for acknowledgement of human sovereignty. The response was a broadcast of human prisoners being tortured to death. The human counterattack was swift and absolute. Military installations were destroyed in a single coordinated strike. Their fleet was hunted down ship by ship. Their colonies were given a choice: surrender or face the consequences. Most chose wisely. The civilization, which had stood for 8,000 years, collapsed in 3 months. But there were worse. High Commander had escaped from human custody during a raid by his loyal officers. He fled to a hidden fortress in deep space and the remaining forces around him. He preached a message of hatred, of vengeance, of total destruction. If they could not enslave humanity, they would exterminate it. His forces launched attacks on human colonies. They killed civilians without discrimination, burned settlements to the ground, left recordings of their atrocities for human forces to find. Wanted rage. He wanted humans to lose control, to make mistakes, to give him an opening. Grace Harper lost her brother in one of those attacks. He had been working on a colony in the Tau system, helping to build a new life for humanity among the stars. They struck without warning, killed everyone, and left the colony burning. When Grace received the news, she did not cry. She did not scream. She simply returned to her ship and began planning her next mission. Colonel Price, now a general, noticed the change in her. The anger that had always been there had frozen into something colder, something more dangerous. He considered removing her from active duty but decided against it. The war needed her skills, and perhaps, he thought, she deserved the chance to make the pay. Admiral Lane received daily reports of atrocities. Each one added weight to a decision he had been avoiding. They would not surrender. They would not negotiate. They would continue killing human civilians until they were stopped, and there was only one way to stop them completely. He called a meeting of the United Earth Council. The leaders who had once debated surrender now debated extinction. Some argued for mercy, for blockade, for waiting until they collapsed from internal pressure. Others pointed to the dead, to the burning colonies, to the recordings of officers laughing as they killed children. Lena Cole spoke last. "They made their choice," she said. "Every time we offered peace, they answered with blood. Every time we showed mercy, they saw weakness. They believe we are soft. They believe we will eventually give up." She paused and looked around the room. "We must prove them wrong." The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Earth would strike at Prime, the planet that had birthed one of the galaxy's oldest and proudest civilizations would be made an example. The fleet that gathered for the assault was the largest humanity had ever assembled. 200 warships, equipped with weapons that Moore and Sandra had refined over 2 years of war. Among them was Grace Harper, commanding her own squadron now, her fighters ready to protect the bombers that would deliver the final blow. They emerged from dimensional fold above Prime on a clear day. The planet below was beautiful in its way, covered in spires of black metal that reached kilometers into the sky. Billions of lived there, worked there, raised their families there. Most of them had never harmed a human. Most of them had never even seen one. Admiral Lane stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the world he was about to destroy. He thought of the dead, of the burned colonies, of the recordings that still haunted his dreams. He thought of High Commander, who was likely watching from somewhere, waiting to see if humanity had the will to do what must be done. "Begin bombardment," ordered. The assault lasted 6 hours. Human weapons fell like rain upon Prime, shattering the great spires, burning the ancient cities, leaving nothing but glass and ash. The defenses fought back desperately, but they were overwhelmed. One by one, the guns fell silent. One by one, the lights went dark. When it was over, Grace Harper flew over the surface of the dead world. She looked at the destruction and tried to feel something: triumph, satisfaction, closure. But there was only emptiness. Her brother was still dead. The war was still raging, and she had just helped kill billions of beings, most of whom had never done anything to her. She returned to her ship and filed her report without comment. The galaxy received news of Prime's destruction with horror. Species that had been considering continued resistance suddenly found themselves eager to negotiate. The message was clear: humanity would not stop. Humanity could not be deterred. Those who continued the war would share the fate of the. Within months, every surviving conquered species had signed treaties with Earth. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the cost of victory weighed heavily on those who had fought. Lane retired soon after, unable to face the medals and ceremonies that awaited him. Moore returned to his research, haunted by the knowledge of what his inventions had done. Sandra published no papers about dimensional fold technology, keeping the secrets buried in classified files. And Grace Harper flew missions at the edge of known space, as far from the burned worlds as she could get, trying to outrun the memories that followed her through the stars. 10 years had passed since the war ended, and the galaxy was learning to live in a new reality. The Galactic Concord, which had ruled for 50,000 years, existed only in history books. Its great halls were empty. Its laws were forgotten. Its species, once united in their certainty of superiority, now governed themselves under the watchful eyes of human observers. The old order had fallen, and something new was rising to take its place. Lena Cole stood at the window of her office in Geneva, watching the sun set over the mountains. She was 62 years old now, her dark hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the weight of decisions that had changed the course of history. She had served as the first president of the Solar Republic for 8 years, guiding humanity through the difficult transition from war to peace. Now her term was ending, and she was ready to rest. A soft chime announced a visitor. Lena turned to see her assistant enter, followed by a being unlike any she had encountered before. It was tall and slender, with skin that seemed to shift between colors like oil on water. Its eyes were large and luminous, filled with a gentle curiosity. "President Cole," her assistant said, "may I present Ambassador of the Reaching Star Collective." They were new. They came from a distant galaxy, traveling for centuries through the void between stars. They had heard rumors of the war, of the species that had risen from slavery to conquer its oppressors. They came to see for themselves. Lena gestured for the ambassador to sit. The folded itself into the chair with a grace that suggested anatomy very different from human. "We have traveled far to meet your people," the ambassador said. Its voice was musical, each word carrying harmonics that human ears could barely detect. "The stories that reach our galaxy are difficult to believe." Lena smiled slightly. "Which stories?" "That you destroyed civilizations, that you burned worlds, that you rose from nothing to become the dominant power in this region of space." The ambassador paused, its colors shifting to deeper blues. "We come from a peaceful galaxy. Such violence is strange to us." Lena considered her response carefully. Through the window, she could see children playing in a park below, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. Those children had been born after the war. They knew about it from history lessons and memorial days, but they did not remember the fear, the rage, the desperation that had driven humanity to do impossible things. "We did not want violence," she said finally. "We did not ask for war. We were a young species just beginning to explore our own solar system when the conquered found us. They looked at 7 billion human beings and saw slaves. They voted to take our freedom, our dignity, our future. Every species agreed. Not one voice spoke against it." The ambassador's colors rippled with something that might have been sympathy. "And you responded with destruction." "We responded with survival." Lena leaned forward slightly. "You must understand something about humans, Ambassador. We are not naturally violent. We build, we create, we dream of better futures. But when threatened, when cornered, when given no choice but death or submission, we become something else entirely. We become survivors. And survivors do whatever is necessary. Even destroy entire worlds." Lena was silent for a moment. The image of Prime still haunted her dreams sometimes, a world of glass and ash where billions had died. She had authorized that attack. She had voted for it in the council. She bore responsibility for every death. "Yes," she said, "even that. They killed our people. They tortured our prisoners. They burned our colonies and laughed while doing it. We offered them peace and they answered with atrocities. So we showed them and the galaxy that there is a price for such cruelty, a price so high that no one would ever dare try again." The ambassador studied her with those luminous eyes. "And now, what does humanity want now that it has won?" Lena stood and walked to the window. The park below was filling with families enjoying the warm evening. Couples walked hand in hand. Old people sat on benches, watching the children play. It was a scene of peace, of normalcy, of the life that humanity had fought so desperately to preserve. "We want to build," she said. "We want to explore, to discover, to create things that will last for. We want to protect those who cannot protect themselves, so that what happened to us never happens to another species." She turned back to the ambassador. "We did not become conquerors because we wanted power. We became conquerors because we had no other choice. Now that we have power, we intend to use it wisely." The conversation continued for hours, laying the groundwork for what would become humanity's first alliance with a truly foreign power. They were different from the conquered species in almost every way, but they recognized something in humanity that they valued: determination, resilience, and a fierce commitment to justice. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other humans were finding their own paths forward. Admiral Lane had retired to a small cabin in Montana, far from the cities and the crowds. He spent his days tending a garden, growing vegetables and flowers that required his attention and care. Visitors came sometimes, journalists seeking interviews, historians wanting first-hand accounts. He turned them all away. The war was over. He had no desire to relive it. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit on his porch and look up at the stars. He would remember the faces of those who had served under him, the ones who had died, the ones who had survived with wounds that would never fully heal. He would think about the decisions he had made, the orders he had given, the worlds he had burned. He did not regret his choices. Given the same circumstances, he would make the same decisions. But he understood now that victory had its own costs, paid in memories and nightmares and the weight of lives that could never be restored. General had taken command of the Unified Human Defense Force after retired. She built an organization designed to prevent future wars rather than fight them. Human ships patrolled the trade routes, protected colonies, and responded to threats before they could grow into conflicts. Under her leadership, humanity became not just a military power but a peacekeeping force, using its strength to maintain stability rather than expand territory. Moore had returned to research, but his focus had changed entirely. He no longer built weapons. Instead, he worked on propulsion systems that would allow humanity to explore the distant reaches of the universe, to discover new worlds and new wonders without the shadow of conflict. His laboratory was filled with young scientists who had grown up during the war, who remembered the fear and wanted to build a better future. Sandra had passed away 5 years after the war ended, her heart finally giving out after decades of overwork. Had been at her bedside when she died, holding her hand as she took her last breath. She had smiled at him and whispered something about finally getting to rest. He kept a photograph of her in his office, a reminder of the woman who had made everything possible. Grace Harper struggled more than the others. The war had left scars on her soul that time did not heal. She had killed more enemies than she could count, destroyed ships and stations and a world. The faces of the dead visited her dreams, asking questions she could not answer. Eventually, she found a kind of peace in teaching. She became an instructor at the military academy, training the next generation of pilots. She taught them not just how to fly and fight, but when to fight and when to show mercy. She told them stories of the war, of the terrible choices that had been made, of the cost of victory. "Remember this," she would tell her students. "We won because we had no other choice. We became monsters because monsters were needed. But we do not have to remain monsters. We can choose to be something better. We can choose to protect instead of destroy, to defend instead of attack, to show mercy when mercy is possible." Her students listened and learned. They went on to serve in the Defense Force, to patrol the trade routes, to respond to crises across the galaxy. They carried her lessons with them, a legacy of wisdom born from pain. 20 years after the war, humanity had become something unprecedented. A species that had been sentenced to slavery now stood as the dominant power in the known galaxy. Former conquered worlds looked to Earth for leadership, for protection, for guidance in navigating a universe that had changed beyond recognition. And on a small planet orbiting a yellow star, children played in parks without knowing fear. They grew up believing that the universe was a place of wonder rather than danger, that the future held promise rather than threat. They were the true victory of the war, the generation that would never know chains. Lena Cole, long retired from public life, spent her final years writing. She recorded everything she remembered, everything she had seen and done and decided. She wanted future generations to understand not just what had happened, but why. She wanted them to know the cost of the freedom they enjoyed. Her final book was published a month before her death at age 87. It was titled simply The Price of Stars. In it, she described the war from beginning to end, holding nothing back, admitting every doubt, every fear, every terrible choice. The last paragraph read, "We did not choose to become warriors. We did not want to burn worlds or shatter civilizations. We wanted only to live, to dream, to reach for the stars. But when chains were offered, we chose fire instead. Remember this, children of Earth. Remember what we did and why we did it. Remember that freedom is never free. And remember that mercy, whenever possible, is the greatest strength of all." The book became required reading in every school on Earth and across human space. It reminded each new generation of where they came from, what they had overcome, and what they must never allow to happen again. The stars waited, vast and endless and full of mystery. Humanity went to meet them, not as slaves or conquerors, but as something new. Something that had been forged in fire and tempered by sacrifice. Something that would never again bow to those who sought to put chains on human souls. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and humanity had found its place among the stars.